The house creaked like an old ship at 3 a.m, and I lay there listening to every groan of the settling wood, wondering if the sounds were coming from the foundation or from what was left of my marriage. My name's Eli Carter, Eli to everyone who matters, and I'm a 41-year-old carpenter who builds things that last. Too bad I couldn't say the same about my relationship with my wife. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Nina stumbled through the front door at 3:17 a.m., her heels clicking against the hardwood floor I'd installed myself 2 summers ago. The sound echoed through our weathered colonial like gunshots in a cathedral. I heard her drop her purse, curse under her breath, then fumble around in the kitchen for what I assumed was a glass of water to wash down whatever excuse she'd cooked up this time. "Hospital emergency," she'd say, like she always did. Nina worked as an HR manager at Coastal General, and apparently human resources had a lot of late-night emergencies these days. Funny how those emergencies always seem to coincide with my brother Mark's poker nights at his lakeside cottage. I rolled over and pretended to be asleep when she finally made it upstairs. The floorboards betrayed her every step, another thing I'd built too well. She slipped into the bathroom, and I heard the shower running. A long shower, the kind that washes away evidence. When she finally crawled into bed, her hair still damp and smelling like expensive shampoo that definitely wasn't the drugstore brand we kept in our bathroom, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "How's the hospital?" I asked, my voice cutting through the darkness. She tensed beside me. "Fine. Just, busy night." "Must have been. You smell different." "It's just the antiseptic. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I knew exactly how it was. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. The next morning, I was in my workshop behind the house, sanding down a cabinet door for the Hendersons' kitchen renovation, when my 16-year-old daughter Mel knocked on the doorframe. "Dad, Mom's acting weird." Mel was sharp as a tack, with Nina's dark hair but my suspicious green eyes. She'd inherited my ability to see through bullshit, which was both a blessing and a curse in a house full of it. "Weird how?" "She's humming. Mom never hums. And she's making pancakes. From scratch." I set down my sandpaper and looked at my daughter. "Pancakes, huh?" "The fancy ones with blueberries. And she asked me 3 times if I wanted whipped cream. Dad, she's freaking me out." Guilt pancakes. I knew them well. Nina made them whenever she'd done something particularly awful and wanted to smooth things over before the truth came out. The last time I'd gotten the pancake treatment was when she'd accidentally donated my grandfather's tool set to Goodwill. "Tell her I'll be in shortly," I said, wiping sawdust off my hands. "She also said she has something important to tell us, both of us, together." My stomach dropped like a stone down a well. In my experience, nothing good ever started with, "I have something important to tell you." I found Nina in the kitchen, still in her bathrobe, flipping pancakes with the kind of manic energy that comes from either too much caffeine or a guilty conscience. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had that forced brightness in her eyes that meant trouble. "Morning, honey," she chirped, not meeting my gaze. "Perfect timing. I made your favorites." I sat down at the kitchen table, the same oak table I'd built when we'd first moved into this house 15 years ago. Mel slumped into the chair across from me, eyeing her mother like she was defusing a bomb. Nina set a plate of perfect golden pancakes in front of me, complete with butter and warm syrup. The works. Definitely guilt pancakes. "So," she said, settling into her chair with her own plate, "I have some news." Here it comes, I thought. She's leaving me for Mark. Or maybe she's already left and just forgot to mention it. "I'm pregnant." The fork halfway to my mouth stopped midair. Mel choked on her orange juice. "Pregnant?" I managed. "Isn't it wonderful? I know we weren't trying, but sometimes these things just happen. The doctor says I'm about 8 weeks along." 8 weeks. I did the math quickly in my head. 8 weeks ago, Nina and I hadn't been intimate in over 2 months. We'd been sleeping on opposite sides of our king-size bed like strangers sharing a hotel room. 8 weeks, I repeated slowly. "Yes, I know it's a surprise, but I think it's exactly what our family needs. A fresh start, a new beginning." Mel was staring at her mother like she'd grown a second head. "Mom, aren't you 39? "Age is just a number, sweetie. Plenty of women have babies at 39 these days." I set my fork down carefully, the way you'd set down a loaded gun. "Nina, we need to talk. Alone." "Oh, Eli, don't be such a worrier. Everything's going to be fine. The baby will have the Carter name, and that's what matters. Family legacy and all that." The Carter name. Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. like she was talking about a brand instead of a family. "Mel, honey, why don't you go get ready for school?" I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "But Dad—" "School. Now." Mel shot her mother one last suspicious look and headed upstairs. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close before turning back to Nina. "Whose baby is it?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. Nina's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, indignation, and finally, resignation. "It's yours, of course. What kind of question is that?" The kind of question a husband asks when his wife comes home at 3 a.m, smelling like someone else's soap, and then announces she's pregnant after months of sleeping in separate beds. Nina's carefully constructed mask began to slip. "Eli, I know things have been difficult between us lately, but—" "Difficult? Nina, we haven't had intimacy since before Christmas. It's March." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this. I thought you'd be happy. I thought you'd want to save our marriage." "Save our marriage? With whose baby?" The slap came out of nowhere, her palm connecting with my cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the kitchen. For a moment, we both stood there in shock. Nina had never hit me before. We'd argued, sure, but never violence. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "How dare you accuse me of cheating?" I touched my cheek, feeling the sting spread across my face. "I'm not accusing you, Nina. I'm stating a fact. You're paranoid. You're jealous of Mark because he's successful, because he's respected in this town, because he's everything you're not." Mark. She'd brought up my brother without me even mentioning his name. That told me everything I needed to know. "At least your brother's a real man," she continued, her voice rising. "At least he knows how to provide for a family, how to make something of himself instead of hiding in a workshop all day playing with wood." The words hit me like a physical blow, not just because of what she'd said, but because of how she'd said it, like she'd been thinking these things for a long time, storing them up for exactly this moment. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my house, now." "This is my house too, Eli. You can't just—" "The deed says otherwise. The deed that's in my name because I'm the one who's been paying the mortgage for 15 years while you've been playing house with my brother." Nina's face went white. "I never said anything about Mark. You didn't have to." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. How much did I know? How much could she still deny? Finally, she grabbed her purse from the counter. "I'll be back for my things. Take your time. I'll be here." After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the half-eaten pancakes and trying to process what had just happened. My wife was pregnant with my brother's child and expected me to raise it for the family name. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. I pulled out my phone and called Brady, my 22-year-old apprentice who helped me with the bigger jobs around town. "Boss, it's kind of early." "Brady, I need you to do me a favor. Can you swing by the house today? I've got a project that requires some discretion." "Sure thing. What kind of project?" I looked around the kitchen, at the life I'd built with my own 2 hands, at the marriage that had apparently been crumbling while I wasn't paying attention. The kind that starts with finding out exactly what my wife's been up to when she's not here. Brady showed up an hour after Mel left for school, carrying a toolbox and wearing his usual confused expression. The kid was good with his hands and loyal as a golden retriever, but subtlety wasn't his strong suit. "So what's this secret project, boss?" he asked, setting his tools down in the kitchen. "I need you to help me install some security cameras. Small ones, discreet ones." Brady's eyebrows shot up. "You having break-in problems?" "Something like that." We spent the morning wiring tiny cameras throughout the house. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the master bedroom. Nothing in Mel's room or the bathrooms. I wasn't a pervert, just a man who needed to know the truth. While Brady worked on the technical setup, I did what I did best. I investigated. Nina had left her laptop on the kitchen counter in her rush to leave, and she'd forgotten to log out of her email. What I found there made my blood run cold. Dozens of messages between Nina and my brother Mark, going back months. Not just the usual affair correspondence, though there was plenty of that, but detailed plans. Plans about me, about our marriage, about the baby, and about how they were going to handle the Eli situation. In one particularly charming exchange from 2 weeks ago, Nina had written, "He's getting suspicious. Maybe we should cool it for a while." Mark's response, "Don't worry about Eli. He's too stupid to figure it out. And even if he does, what's he going to do? He needs you more than you need him." Nina's reply, "You're right. Besides, once the baby comes, he'll have to stay. for Mel's sake if nothing else. He's too much of a good guy to break up the family. They'd been planning this. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. It was a trap. They expected me to raise Mark's child, to play the devoted father while they continued their affair right under my nose. The family name Nina had mentioned wasn't about legacy, it was about legitimacy, making sure the baby had a father on paper while Mark got to play fun uncle. But the emails were just the beginning. Nina had been sloppy with her digital footprint, and I found a folder labeled Personal Training that contained videos that definitely weren't about exercise. Videos of my wife and my brother in his lakeside cottage, in his auto shop after hours, and in what looked like a dozen different motel rooms around the county. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the laughter. In several of the videos, I could hear them talking about me, making jokes about the clueless carpenter, who was too busy playing with wood to notice what was happening in his own bedroom. "Boss?" Brady's voice snapped me back to reality. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I muttered, closing the laptop. "How are we doing with the cameras?" "All set. You can monitor everything from your phone. But boss, can I ask what this is really about?" I looked at Brady, 22 years old, still believed in things like loyalty and honesty, still thought the world was a fair place where good guys won and bad guys got what they deserved. "Brady, what would you do if someone betrayed you, someone you trusted completely?" He thought about it for a moment. "I guess I'd want them to know how it feels." "Exactly." That afternoon, I drove to the Fisherman's Knot, the local bar and grill where half the town gathered to drink beer and trade gossip. If you wanted to know anything about anyone in our little Maine coastal community, you started at the Knot. Tina Morrison was holding court at her usual table near the bar, surrounded by her coven of middle-aged gossips. Tina was Nina's best friend and the town's unofficial information broker. If Nina was having an affair, Tina not only knew about it, she was probably helping coordinate it. "Eli Carter," Tina called out when she saw me. "Honey, you look terrible. Everything okay at home?" I slid into the empty chair across from her, noting how her smile faltered slightly when I didn't return her fake cheerfulness. "Actually, Tina, I wanted to talk to you about that, about home." "Oh?" "About Nina and Mark." The temperature at the table dropped about 20 degrees. Tina's friends suddenly found their drinks very interesting, and the conversation around us died down to a whisper. "I'm not sure what you mean," Tina said carefully. "I think you do. I think you know exactly what I mean. The question is, are you going to keep lying to my face, or are we going to have an honest conversation?" Tina glanced around the table, looking for support, but her friends were already starting to distance themselves. Nothing spread faster in a small town than the scent of scandal, and nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire. "Eli, maybe we should talk privately." "No, I think here is perfect. After all, you've been discussing my marriage publicly for months. Why stop now?" Tina's face flushed red. "I would never—" "You would never what? Help your best friend cheat on her husband? Cover for her when she's out screwing his brother? Or just never get caught doing it?" The entire bar had gone quiet now. Even the bartender had stopped pretending not to listen. "How long, Tina?" "Eli, please. How long have you been helping my wife make a fool of me?" Tina's composure finally cracked. "It's not what you think. Nina loves you. She's just confused." "Confused? She's 8 weeks pregnant with my brother's baby. That's not confusion. That's calculation." The gasp that went up from the surrounding tables was audible. In a town this size, Nina's pregnancy would be front-page news by dinner time, and the paternity question would be the lead story. "You don't understand," Tina whispered. "It's complicated. Uncomplicate it for me." Tina looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run. It started last summer, at the 4th of July barbecue at Mark's place. Nina had too much to drink, and you were working late on the Henderson project. Mark was attentive. Attentive? One thing led to another. Nina felt guilty afterward, said it would never happen again. But then it did. Mark can be very persuasive, and Nina felt like you were pulling away from her, spending all your time in that workshop. So it's my fault. That's not what I'm saying. I told her she should talk to you, work things out properly. But Mark convinced her that you'd never forgive her, that you'd take Mel and leave her with nothing. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. So instead of talking to me, she decided to get pregnant and trap me into raising another man's child. She thought if you had a baby to focus on, you'd be happy again, that it would bring you back together. The logic was so twisted, so fundamentally selfish, that I almost had to admire it. Nina had cheated on me, gotten pregnant by my brother, and then convinced herself that forcing me to raise the child would somehow fix our marriage. And you went along with this plan. I tried to talk her out of it, but Nina can be very determined when she wants something. What she wanted was to have her cake and eat it too, keep me as the stable provider while she played house with Mark. Tina didn't deny it. She couldn't. I stood up, fishing a 20 out of my wallet and dropping it on the table. Thanks for the honesty, Tina. It's refreshing. Eli, what are you going to do? I looked around the bar, at all the faces staring back at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. These people had been watching my marriage fall apart like it was their personal soap opera, and now they were waiting to see how the cuckold carpenter would handle his humiliation. I'm going to give everyone something worth talking about. Mark's auto shop sat on the edge of town like a grease-stained monument to blue-collar success. Carter Automotive had been in our family for 2 generations, passed down from our father to Mark as the older son. I'd never resented that. I preferred working with wood to metal anyway, but seeing the sign with our family name on it now made my stomach turn. It was after 9 p.m. when I pulled into the lot. Mark's vintage Mustang was parked in its usual spot near the office, gleaming under the security lights. He'd restored that car himself, spent 3 years and probably $15,000 turning it from a rust bucket into his pride and joy. He loved that car more than he'd ever loved his wife Lisa. The shop was dark, except for a light in the back office. I knew Mark's routine. He stayed late every Tuesday to do paperwork and drink beer while avoiding going home to Lisa and their twin boys. It was probably when he did his best thinking about how to destroy other people's lives. I didn't knock. The office door was unlocked, and I walked in to find Mark hunched over his desk, a half-empty bottle of Budweiser in one hand and a stack of invoices in the other. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and his face went through the same series of expressions Nina's had that morning: surprise, guilt, and finally, defiance. Eli, what brings you by so late? I think you know. Mark set down his beer and leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence. He was 3 years older than me and about 20 pounds heavier, most of it muscle from years of wrestling with car engines. In a fair fight, he'd probably win. But I wasn't planning on fighting fair. Nina told you about the baby, huh? She did. And I know it's yours. Mark's mask slipped for just a second, long enough for me to see the fear underneath. Then he rallied, putting on the cocky smile that had gotten him through high school and most of his adult life. That's a hell of an accusation, little brother. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. 8 weeks pregnant, Mark. We both know Nina and I haven't been intimate since before Christmas. Maybe you should have paid more attention to your wife. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a slap. This wasn't just about intimacy or even love. This was about power. Mark had taken my wife because he could, because it made him feel superior, because destroying my marriage was just another way to prove he was the better Carter brother. You're right, I said, pulling out my phone. I should have been paying attention. I opened the video app and hit play. Mark's face appeared on the screen, younger and more relaxed, laughing as he said, "Poor Eli. Guy's so busy playing with his wood that he doesn't notice his wife playing with mine." The color drained from Mark's face as his own voice filled the office. "Where did you get that?" Nina's laptop. She kept everything, Mark. Every video, every photo, every email where you two planned out how to handle the Eli situation. Mark lunged for the phone, but I was ready for him. I stepped back, keeping the device out of reach while his recorded voice continued to mock me from the speakers. "You bastard," Mark snarled. "You can't use that. It's illegal." "Is it? I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure my wife's laptop is community property. And these videos? Well, let's just say you two weren't very concerned about privacy when you made them." Mark slumped back into his chair, the fight going out of him as he realized the scope of his exposure. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something, Mark. This isn't just about Nina. This isn't just about the baby. This is about 15 years of marriage, about my daughter's stability, about the fact that you've been laughing at me behind my back while I trusted you. Eli, I'm not finished." I leaned forward, close enough to smell the beer on his breath. "You thought I was stupid. You thought I was weak. You thought I'd just roll over and take it like a good little cuckold. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? You seduce my wife, get her pregnant, and then what? We all live happily ever after while I raise your bastard child?" Mark flinched at the word bastard, and I realized I'd hit a nerve. Mark had always been sensitive about legitimacy, about being the real Carter son, about carrying on the family name. The irony that he was now trying to pass his illegitimate child off as mine wasn't lost on either of us. "Nina loves you," he said weakly. She She needed something you couldn't give her. What I couldn't give her? Mark, I gave her everything. I built her a house with my own hands. I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for her car, her clothes, her lifestyle. I put her needs ahead of mine for 15 years. What exactly couldn't I give her? Mark couldn't meet my eyes. Excitement, adventure. She felt like she was suffocating in suburbia. So you offered to help her breathe. It wasn't like that. What was it like? Mark was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It was easy. She was lonely, I was available, and it felt good to be wanted. And the pregnancy? That was an accident. We were careful most of the time, but not careful enough. Nina panicked when she found out. She wanted to, take care of it, but I convinced her not to. I stared at him. You convinced her to keep the baby. It's my child, Eli, my flesh and blood. I couldn't let her just... So you convinced her to trick me into raising it instead. We hoped you'd never have to know, that you'd just accept it and move on. The sheer selfishness of it was breathtaking. They'd planned to let me believe the child was mine, to let me form a bond with it, to let me love it as my own, all while they continued their affair behind my back. You know what the funny thing is, Mark? What? I might have forgiven the affair. People make mistakes, marriages go through rough patches. I might have even worked things out with Nina if she'd come to me honestly. Mark looked up hopefully. But this calculated deception? This plan to make me an unwitting participant in your betrayal? This I can't forgive. I stood up, pocketing my phone. You've got 24 hours. 24 hours for what? To tell Lisa the truth. To tell your boys that Daddy's been playing house with Aunt Nina. To explain to your customers why Carter Automotive might be changing its name. You can't do this, Eli. You'll destroy everything. No, Mark, you already did that. I'm just making sure everyone knows who's responsible. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Mark? You might want to check on your Mustang. I left him sitting in his office, probably trying to figure out what I meant about his car. He'd figure it out soon enough. Outside, Brady was waiting by my truck, holding a crowbar and grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. All done, boss. Just like you asked. I looked over at Mark's Mustang. All 4 tires were flat, the side mirrors were gone, and the interior was filled with what looked like several pounds of fresh fish guts, courtesy of Brady's cousin who worked at the docks. Think he'll get the message? If he doesn't, I said, climbing into my truck, we'll just have to get more creative. The next morning brought the kind of small-town drama that spreads faster than a grease fire. By the time I got to the Fisherman's Knot for my usual coffee, half the town was buzzing about Mark Carter's vandalized Mustang, and the other half was whispering about Nina Carter's mysterious pregnancy. I sat at the counter, sipping my coffee and listening to the gossip swirl around me like smoke. It was fascinating to watch how quickly the narrative was building, how each person who retold the story added their own little embellishments. I heard Eli Carter caught his wife with his own brother, whispered Mrs. Henderson from the booth behind me. Well, I heard she's been carrying on with half the men in town, replied her companion. You know how these HR types are, always looking for their next promotion. That poor man, building her that beautiful house, and this is how she repays him. I smiled into my coffee. The court of public opinion was already in session, and the verdict wasn't going in Nina's favor. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at the cottage. N. Nina wanted to meet at Mark's lakeside cottage, the scene of the crime, so to speak. The irony was almost poetic. I finished my coffee, left a generous tip for Dolores the waitress, and headed out to my truck. Several people nodded at me sympathetically as I passed, and I could feel their eyes following me with the kind of morbid curiosity reserved for car accidents and public humiliations. The cottage sat on a secluded inlet about 15 minutes outside of town, surrounded by pine trees and accessible only by a narrow gravel road. Mark had bought it 5 years ago as an investment property, but it had quickly become his personal retreat from family responsibilities. Now I knew it had served a different purpose entirely. Nina's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. I sat in my truck for a moment, watching the cottage and thinking about all the times I'd been invited here for family barbecues, all the times I'd complimented Mark on his bachelor pad, all the times I'd joked about him needing a place to hide from Lisa and the boys. The front door opened before I could knock. Nina stood in the doorway wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman I'd married 20 years ago, and for just a moment I felt a pang of something that might have been nostalgia. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. This is an interesting choice of venue. She had the grace to look ashamed. I know how it looks. Do you? Because it looks like you're meeting your husband at your lover's cottage to discuss your pregnancy with his child. Nina winced. Can we please go inside? I don't want to have this conversation in the driveway. The cottage was exactly what you'd expect from a middle-aged man's idea of a romantic getaway: leather furniture, a stone fireplace, and a bar cart stocked with expensive whiskey. What I hadn't expected were the framed photos on the mantel, pictures of Nina and Mark together, smiling and relaxed, looking like a real couple. How long have you been playing house here? It's not what you think. Nina, I'm past the point where I care what you think I think. I know what this is. I know what you've been doing. The only question now is what we're going to do about it. She sat down on the leather couch, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. I never meant for it to go this far. Which part? The affair, the pregnancy, or the plan to trick me into raising another man's child? All of it. None of it. I don't know anymore. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I'm scared, Eli. You should be. What's that supposed to mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. The video app was open, displaying a thumbnail of her and Mark in what appeared to be this very room. It means your laptop had some very interesting files on it. Nina's face went white. You went through my computer? Community property. Remember? Just like this cottage, just like Mark's auto shop, just like the reputation you've both spent months destroying. You can't show those to anyone. It would ruin me. It would ruin you? Nina, you're 8 weeks pregnant with my brother's child. You've been conducting an affair in a town where everyone knows everyone else's business. You've been planning to deceive me into raising a child that isn't mine. Exactly what reputation do you think you still have to protect? She started crying then, the kind of desperate sobs that might have moved me a month ago. Now they just sounded like manipulation. I know I made mistakes, she said between sobs. But I love you, Eli. I've always loved you. You have a funny way of showing it. Mark means nothing to me. He was just there when I needed someone. And I wasn't? You were always working. Always in that damn workshop. I felt like I was married to a ghost. So you decided to get pregnant by my brother. That was an accident. The pregnancy might have been an accident. The decision to let me believe it was mine wasn't. Nina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What do you want from me, Eli? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to realize that you can't just destroy people's lives and expect them to smile and say thank you. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. You hurt me. You hurt Mel. You hurt Lisa and Mark's boys. You hurt everyone who trusted you, everyone who believed in us as a couple. So, what happens now? I looked around the cottage one more time, at the photos on the mantel, at the life Nina and Mark had built in secret while I was home building cabinets and raising our daughter. Now you get to find out what it feels like to be the town joke. I headed for the door, then stopped. Oh, and Nina, you might want to check the news tonight. I hear there's going to be an interesting story about a local businessman and his creative approach to family planning. I left her sitting on the couch, probably trying to figure out what I meant. She'd find out soon enough. Brady was waiting in the parking lot of the Fisherman's Knot when I got back to town, practically bouncing with excitement. Boss, you're not going to believe what happened at the auto shop. Try me. Mark showed up this morning to find his Mustang, right? And when he saw what we did to it, he started screaming and yelling about vandalism and calling the cops. And then Mrs. Patterson walked by. You know, the old lady who lives next to the shop. She told him she saw the whole thing. Said it looked like whoever did it had a key to the car and knew exactly how to disable the security system. I smiled. Mrs. Patterson was about 75 years old and sharp as a tack. She was also the biggest gossip in a town full of gossips. What else did Mrs. Patterson see? She told Mark she'd been watching the shop for months, ever since she noticed all the late-night visitors. Said she had a whole notebook full of license plate numbers and times. Including Nina's car? Especially Nina's car. Turns out Mrs. Patterson has been documenting Mark's extracurricular activities for her own entertainment. The beauty of small-town justice was that it was thorough. In a city, you could have an affair, and maybe only a few people would know. In a place like this, everyone knew everything, and they'd been keeping score. There's more, Brady continued. Lisa showed up while Mark was dealing with the car situation. Mark's wife, Lisa? Yeah, apparently Mrs. Patterson decided it was time to share her notebook. Lisa got to hear all about her husband's afternoon appointments with your wife. I felt a brief pang of sympathy for Lisa. She was a good woman who'd married the wrong man, and now she was paying the price for Mark's selfishness. How did she take it? About how you'd expect. A lot of screaming, a lot of crying, a lot of threats involving lawyers and divorce papers. And Mark? Last I saw, he was trying to clean fish guts out of his car while his wife threw his clothes out of their bedroom window. The mental image was almost enough to make me feel sorry for my brother. Almost. Boss, can I ask you something? Shoot. What's the end game here? I mean, you've got the goods on both of them, the whole town's talking, and Mark's marriage is falling apart. What's next? I looked at Brady. Loyal, hard-working Brady, who'd helped me without asking too many questions, who'd trusted me enough to become an accomplice in my revenge plot. Next, we make sure everyone understands that there are consequences for betraying the people who trust you. How? I smiled, thinking about the conversation I'd had with Jim Morrison at the local newspaper that morning, about the photos and videos I'd provided him with, about the story that would be running in tomorrow's edition. Ever hear of the Scarlet Letter, Brady? Vaguely. High school English, right? Right. It's about public shame, about making sure everyone knows exactly who the sinners are. And you're going to give them scarlet letters? Something like that. The Coastal Gazette hit the newsstands at 6 a.m. on Friday morning, and by 7 a.m. my phone was ringing off the hook. Jim Morrison had outdone himself with the headline, "Local Businessman's Affair Rocks Small Town." The article was a masterpiece of small-town journalism, just factual enough to avoid libel charges, just salacious enough to sell papers. Jim had managed to tell the entire story without using names, but in a town of 8,000 people, everyone knew exactly who prominent auto shop owner and hospital administrator referred to. The photos were the real knockout punch. Jim had chosen carefully, nothing pornographic or illegal, just Nina and Mark entering and leaving the cottage together, holding hands in the auto shop parking lot after hours, sharing what was obviously an intimate moment at a restaurant 2 towns over. The kind of evidence that left no room for denial or alternative explanations. My favorite detail was the timeline Jim had constructed, showing the progression of the affair alongside Nina's pregnancy announcement. He'd even included quotes from anonymous sources who expressed shock and disappointment at the betrayal of family trust. By noon, I couldn't walk through town without people stopping me to offer their support or share their outrage on my behalf. The general consensus seemed to be that I was a saint for putting up with Nina's behavior and a hero for finally exposing the truth. Nina, on the other hand, had called in sick to work and wasn't answering her phone. Mark had closed the auto shop for the day, citing a family emergency. Lisa had filed for divorce and moved in with her sister, taking the twin boys with her. I was in my workshop, pretending to sand a cabinet door while actually savoring my victory when Mel came home from school. "Dad, there's a bunch of people outside." I looked out the window to see a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk in front of our house. Some were neighbors offering support. Others were just curiosity seekers hoping to catch a glimpse of the town's newest celebrity scandal. "How was school?" I asked. Weird. Everyone kept staring at me and whispering. Jenny Patterson asked me if it was true that Mom was having Uncle Mark's baby. I set down my sandpaper and looked at my daughter. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to mind her own business. But Dad, is it true?" I'd been dreading this conversation, but I'd also known it was inevitable. Mel was too smart to be fooled by lies or half-truths, and she deserved to know what was happening to her family. "Yes, it's true." Mel nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting this answer. "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" "Probably." "Good." The simple, matter-of-fact way she said it surprised me. "Good? Dad, I'm not stupid. I've known something was wrong for months. Mom's been acting weird, you've been sleeping in the guest room, and Uncle Mark's been coming around way too much when you weren't here." "You knew about Mark?" I suspected. He'd show up with flowers for Mom, or they'd have these long private conversations in the kitchen. Plus, he started being extra nice to me, like he was trying to win me over or something. I felt a surge of anger at the thought of Mark trying to manipulate my daughter, trying to position himself as some kind of father figure while he was destroying her family. "Are you okay with all this?" Mel shrugged. "I'm 16, Dad. I'm not a little kid who needs to believe her parents have a perfect marriage. Besides, you're better off without her." "Mel, no, really. Mom's been treating you like crap for years. Always criticizing you. Always making you feel like you weren't good enough. You deserve better." The loyalty in her voice, the fierce protectiveness, reminded me why I was fighting this battle. Not just for my own dignity, but for Mel's future, for the example I was setting about how people should be treated. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we figure out how to move forward, just you and me." "What about the baby?" "That's between your mother and Mark." It's not our responsibility. Mel hugged me then, the kind of fierce, protective hug that reminded me she was still my little girl despite her mature attitude about the situation. I love you, Dad. I love you too, kiddo. That evening, I was sitting on my front porch, watching the last of the curiosity seekers drift away, when a familiar car pulled into my driveway. Nina got out slowly, like she was walking to her own execution. She looked terrible, red-eyed, disheveled, wearing the same clothes she'd had on at the cottage 2 days ago. The confident, manipulative woman who'd tried to trap me with another man's child was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken and desperate. "Can we talk?" she asked. "We're talking." "Inside. Please. Everyone's watching." I glanced around at the neighboring houses, noting the curtains twitching in several windows. Nina was right. We had an audience. 5 minutes, I said. Inside, Nina collapsed into the chair across from my kitchen table, the same chair where she'd announced her pregnancy just a week ago. It felt like a lifetime. "You destroyed me," she said without preamble. "I exposed you. There's a difference. My job, my reputation, my friends, everything's gone. Actions have consequences, Nina. You made choices, and now you get to live with the results." "I lost the baby." The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever I'd been expecting her to say, it wasn't that. "What?" "I lost the baby. This morning. The stress, the shame, the..." She gestured vaguely at the air around her. "The doctor said it happens sometimes in the first trimester." I stared at her, trying to process this information. The baby, Mark's baby, the child that had been the catalyst for this entire mess, was gone. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Whatever Nina had done, losing a child was a tragedy. Are you? Are you really sorry, or are you relieved that you don't have to deal with the complication anymore?" The question caught me off guard. Was I relieved? Part of me, the part that was still angry and hurt, probably was. But another part, the part that remembered loving Nina once upon a time, felt genuinely sad for her loss. "I'm sorry you're in pain," I said finally. "But I'm not sorry that the truth came out." "The truth." Nina laughed bitterly. "The truth is that I was lonely and stupid, and I made terrible choices. The truth is that I threw away 20 years of marriage for a few months of excitement. The truth is that I destroyed everything good in my life because I was too selfish to appreciate what I had." "Then why did you do it?" "Because Mark made me feel special. Because he paid attention to me, complimented me, made me feel like I was worth pursuing. Because you were always working, always tired, always more interested in your projects than in me." "So it was my fault." No, it was my fault. I know that now. I could have talked to you about feeling neglected. I could have suggested counseling or a vacation or just asked you to spend more time with me. Instead, I chose the most destructive possible solution. She was crying again, but these tears seemed different, more genuine, less manipulative. "What do you want from me, Nina?" "I want you to forgive me. I want us to try again. I want to fix this." I looked at her sitting in my kitchen, broken and desperate, asking for a second chance she didn't deserve. A month ago, maybe even a week ago, I might have been tempted. But too much had happened. Too much trust had been broken. "I can't. Please, Eli, I know I don't deserve it, but..." "You're right, you don't deserve it. And more importantly, I don't want it." The finality in my voice seemed to hit her like a slap. "What?" "I don't want to fix this, Nina. I don't want to try again. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering when you're going to betray me next. I would never..." "You said that before, in our wedding vows, actually." "Forsaking all others. Remember that part?" Nina's shoulders slumped in defeat. "So that's it? 20 years of marriage and you're just done?" "I'm not the one who ended our marriage, Nina. You did that when you decided to sleep with my brother. I'm just making it official." She sat in silence for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know you hate me. I don't hate you. I pity you. You had everything. A husband who loved you, a daughter who respected you, a community that valued you. And you threw it all away for what? A few cheap thrills with a man who's already moved on to his next conquest? Mark hasn't moved on. He says he loves me. Mark says a lot of things. Ask his wife how much his words are worth." Nina winced. "Lisa won't even talk to me. She crossed the street yesterday when she saw me coming." "Can you blame her?" "I guess not." Nina stood up slowly, like an old woman with arthritis. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the divorce." "Already done. You'll be hearing from him next week." She paused at the kitchen door. "For what it's worth, Eli, I really am sorry. Not just about getting caught, but about all of it. You deserved better." Yes, I did. After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen, thinking about the conversation, about the baby that would never be born, about the marriage that was finally officially over. Mel came downstairs an hour later, wearing her pajamas and carrying her favorite blanket. Was that Mom? Yeah. Is she okay? I considered how to answer that. She's dealing with some consequences. She'll figure it out. Are you okay? I looked at my daughter, smart, loyal, resilient Mel, who'd been caught in the middle of this mess but had somehow managed to keep her head above water. I'm getting there. She curled up on the couch next to me, pulling her blanket around both of us like she used to do when she was little. Dad? Yeah? I'm proud of you. For what? For standing up for yourself, for not letting them walk all over you anymore. I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Thanks, kiddo. What happens now? I thought about that question, about the future stretching out ahead of us, uncertain but full of possibilities. Now we figure out what comes next, just you and me. Sounds perfect. 3 months later, I was putting the finishing touches on a custom bookshelf for the Hendersons when Brady burst into my workshop with a newspaper in his hand and a grin on his face. Boss, you've got to see this. The headline read, Local Auto Shop Closes Amid Financial Scandal. The article detailed how Carter Automotive had been forced to shut down after a series of lawsuits, unpaid debts, and the loss of several major contracts. Mark's divorce from Lisa had been finalized, and she'd been awarded half of everything, including half the business, which she'd promptly sold to a competitor. There's more, Brady said, flipping to the second page. Look at this. A smaller article described how Mark had been arrested for driving under the influence and public intoxication after what witnesses described as an emotional breakdown outside the Fisherman's Knot. The photo showed him being led away in handcuffs, looking like a man who'd lost everything. And Nina? Last I heard, she moved to Portland, got a job with some temp agency doing basic office work, nothing like the fancy HR position she had here. I set down my sandpaper and leaned back in my chair. 3 months ago, Mark had been the successful businessman and I'd been the cuckolded husband. Now our positions were completely reversed, and I hadn't had to do anything illegal or unethical to make it happen. I'd simply made sure the truth came to light and let the consequences play out naturally. You feel bad for them at all? Brady asked. I considered the question. Did I feel bad that my wife and brother had destroyed their lives through their own selfishness and stupidity? Did I regret that their actions had caught up with them? No, I said finally. They made their choices. They knew there would be consequences. And you're happy with how it all turned out? I looked around my workshop, my sanctuary, my kingdom, the place where I created things that would last. Then I thought about Mel, now 17 and thriving, getting ready for her senior year of high school and already talking about college. I thought about the respect I'd earned in the community, the way people looked at me now with admiration instead of pity. Yeah, I'm happy. That evening, Mel and I were having dinner, take-out Chinese food eaten at the kitchen table I'd built 20 years ago, when she brought up something that had been on my mind lately. Dad, Jenny Patterson asked me if you were ever going to start dating again. I nearly choked on my lo mein. She asked you that? Well, her mom asked her to ask me. You know how Mrs. Patterson is. She thinks she's the town matchmaker. And what did you tell her? I told her it was none of her business, but... Mel paused, twirling noodles around her fork. I wouldn't mind if you did. Start dating, I mean. Really? Dad, you're 41 years old. You're not dead. And honestly, after watching what happened with Mom, I think you deserve to be with someone who actually appreciates you. The maturity in her voice still surprised me sometimes. Mel had grown up a lot in the past few months, forced to deal with adult realities that most teenagers never had to face. Anyone in particular Mrs. Patterson has in mind? Actually, yeah. Lisa. I stared at my daughter. Lisa, Mark's ex-wife Lisa. Think about it, Dad. She's single now. She knows exactly what kind of man Mark is versus what kind of man you are, and she's got good taste in everything except her first husband. The idea was so unexpected that I didn't know how to respond. Lisa Carter, soon to be Lisa something else once she changed her name back, was a good woman who'd been caught in the same web of betrayal that had trapped me. We'd spoken briefly at the grocery store a few weeks ago, an awkward but friendly conversation about how our kids were handling everything. I don't know, Mel. It might be too weird, too complicated, or it might be perfect. You both know what it's like to be betrayed by people you trusted. You both know what it's like to rebuild your life from scratch. And you both deserve to be happy. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. Later that night, after Mel had gone to bed, I sat on my front porch with a beer and thought about everything that had happened. A year ago, I'd been a man who thought he had a solid marriage, a close relationship with his brother, and a predictable future. Now I was divorced, estranged from Mark, and facing an uncertain but oddly exciting future. My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected it to be Brady or one of my clients, but the name on the screen made me pause. Lisa. Hi, Eli. I know this might seem strange, but I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee sometime. I think we have a lot to talk about. No pressure, just two people who've been through similar experiences. Let me know. Lisa. I stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about second chances and new beginnings, about the difference between revenge and justice, about the possibility that something good could come out of all the destruction and betrayal. Then I typed back, I'd like that. How about Saturday morning at the Fisherman's Knot? Her response came quickly. Perfect. See you at 10. I finished my beer and headed inside, passing the framed photo of Mel and me that now sat where the wedding picture used to be. In the photo, we were both grinning at the camera, covered in sawdust from a project we'd worked on together. We looked happy. We looked like survivors. The next morning, I was in the workshop early, putting the final touches on a rocking chair I'd been building for Mrs. Henderson's new grandchild, when I heard footsteps on the gravel driveway. I looked up to see a familiar figure approaching, Mark, looking older and more haggard than I'd ever seen him. He stopped at the workshop door, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped in defeat. Can we talk? I set down my sandpaper and studied my brother. 3 months ago, he'd been confident, successful, the golden boy who could do no wrong. Now, he looked like a man who'd lost everything and was still trying to figure out how it had happened. What do you want, Mark? I want to apologize. For all of it. For Nina, for the lies, for the way I treated you. Okay. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say? That I forgive you? That we can go back to being brothers like none of this ever happened? Mark's face crumpled. I don't know. Maybe. I miss having a family. You had a family. You had Lisa and the boys. You threw that away for a few months with my wife. I know I screwed up. I lost everything. My business, my marriage, my kids barely speak to me. And for what? Nina won't even return my calls now? I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the videos, the emails, the casual cruelty of his laughter as he mocked me behind my back. You want to know the truth, Mark? Yeah. I don't hate you anymore. I did for a while, but now I just feel sorry for you. You had everything. A successful business, a good wife, 2 great kids, the respect of the community, and you threw it all away because you couldn't keep your hands off my wife. I know. But here's the thing. I'm not going to fix this for you. I'm not going to forgive you just to make you feel better about your choices. You destroyed my marriage, my trust, and my family. The fact that you also destroyed your own doesn't make us even. Mark nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I think you came here hoping I'd take pity on you, maybe help you get back on your feet, maybe put in a good word with Lisa or the boys, but that's not going to happen. So that's it? We're not brothers anymore? I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to find some trace of the brother I'd grown up with, the man I'd trusted and admired for most of my life, but all I saw was a stranger who'd betrayed me in the worst possible way. We stopped being brothers the moment you decided to sleep with my wife. Mark stood there for a long moment, probably hoping I'd change my mind, probably waiting for some sign of the forgiveness he felt he deserved. When it didn't come, he turned and walked away without another word. I watched him go, feeling something that might have been sadness or might have been relief. Either way, it felt like closure. Saturday morning came bright and clear, and I found myself standing outside the Fisherman's Knot at 9:55, nervous as a teenager on his first date. Through the window, I could see Lisa already seated at a corner table, looking as nervous as I felt. She smiled when she saw me come in, and for the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. Hi, Eli. Hi, Lisa. We sat down across from each other, 2 people who'd been through hell and were trying to figure out what came next. The conversation started awkwardly. Small talk about the weather, about our kids, about anything except the obvious shared experience that had brought us together. But gradually, we began to open up. Lisa talked about the humiliation of discovering her husband's affair, about the challenge of explaining to her twin boys why Daddy didn't live with them anymore, about the strange experience of being pitied by people who used to envy her seemingly perfect marriage. I talked about the betrayal, about the anger, about the satisfaction of watching Mark's life fall apart, and the guilt that came with that satisfaction. Do you think we're bad people for not feeling worse about what happened to them? Lisa asked. No, I think we're human. They hurt us, and there's nothing wrong with feeling vindicated when they face consequences for their actions. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried harder to save my marriage, for the boys' sake. Would you want your boys to stay in a marriage where they were being betrayed and disrespected? No, never. Then you made the right choice? We talked for 2 hours, and by the time we left the restaurant, something had shifted between us. We weren't just two victims of the same betrayal anymore. We were two people who'd survived something terrible and were ready to start building something new. Would you like to have dinner sometime? I asked as we stood by our cars. I'd like that very much. What about the boys? How do you think they'd feel about you dating their uncle? Ex-uncle, Lisa corrected. And honestly, they've been asking when I'm going to start dating again. They want me to be happy. Smart kids. They get it from their mother. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Friday night, I know a place in Portland that makes incredible seafood. It's a date. As I drove home, I thought about the strange turns life could take, about how the worst betrayal of my life had somehow led to the possibility of something better than I'd ever imagined. Nina and Mark had tried to destroy me, but instead they'd freed me from a marriage that was already dead, and opened the door to a future I never would have considered. That evening, Mel and I were working together in the workshop. She was learning to use the lathe while I finished the rocking chair, when she brought up the subject I'd been expecting. So how did coffee go with Lisa? How did you know about that? Dad, this is a small town. Mrs. Patterson saw you two at the Knot and called half the neighborhood before you'd even ordered. I shook my head, smiling. It went well. We're having dinner Friday night. Good. I like Lisa. She's nice, and she makes excellent chocolate chip cookies. Is that your main criteria for approving my dating choices? Among others, she's also smart, funny, and she already knows what a good man looks like after being married to a bad one. When did you become such a relationship expert? I learned from watching what not to do. That night, I sat on my front porch with my usual beer, looking out at the town I'd lived in my entire adult life, thinking about revenge and justice and the difference between the two. I'd set out to make Nina and Mark pay for their betrayal, and I'd succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. But somewhere along the way, the revenge had transformed into something else. Not just punishment for them, but liberation for me. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Thank you for coffee. I haven't felt this hopeful in months. I typed back, thank you for giving me something to look forward to. As I sat there in the gathering darkness, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not just the destruction of my enemies, but the construction of something better from the ruins they'd left behind. Nina and Mark had thought they were so clever, so superior, so entitled to take whatever they wanted without consequences. They'd learned better, and I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so much better than the one they tried to take from you that their betrayal becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. I raised my beer in a silent toast to the future, to second chances, to the strange ways that justice sometimes works itself out in small towns where everyone knows everyone else's business. Here's to family names, I said to the empty night, and to making sure they mean something. The next morning brought news that Mark had left town, reportedly heading south to start over somewhere nobody knew his story. Nina had apparently done the same, disappearing from Portland without leaving a forwarding address. I felt no satisfaction in their exile, no triumph in their defeat. They were just gone, like a bad dream that fades in the morning light, leaving behind nothing but the memory of lessons learned and the promise of better days ahead. Mel came down to breakfast wearing her school clothes and a smile that reminded me why I'd fought so hard to protect what mattered. Morning, Dad. Ready for another day in paradise? With you? Always. She kissed my cheek and grabbed her backpack. Oh, by the way, Mrs. Henderson called. She wants to commission another rocking chair for her daughter who's expecting twins. Twins? That's ambitious. She said to tell you that she trusts your work because you build things that last. After Mel left for school, I stood in my kitchen, looking around at the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. The house was quieter now, but it was also more peaceful. The tension that had filled these rooms for months was gone, replaced by something that felt like contentment. I poured myself another cup of coffee and headed out to my workshop. I had rocking chairs to build, a business to run, a daughter to raise, and a future to construct. It was going to be a good day. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was genuinely happy.